The sun blazed mercilessly as Karen's shrill laughter echoed across Jake's property, her designer bikini catching the light as she lounged in the crystal-clear pool she'd somehow convinced the city to install on his ranch. 20 cars lined his driveway, strangers splashing and drinking on land his family had owned for 3 generations. But as Jake watched from his kitchen window, jaw clenched in fury, he didn't notice the gate swinging open behind him, or the 200 head of cattle slowly making their way toward the glittering water. Sometimes revenge comes in the most unexpected forms, and today, Mother Nature was about to deliver poetic justice with hooves, horns, and a Jake Morrison stood at his kitchen window, steam rising from his coffee mug as he watched the impossible scene unfold on his own property. Where yesterday there had been nothing but sun-baked earth and sparse grass, today a massive above-ground pool dominated his back pasture, surrounded by pristine white lounge chairs and a fully stocked tiki bar. "What the hell?" he muttered, his weathered hands gripping the ceramic mug so tight his knuckles turned white. The sound of car doors slamming drew his attention to the front of his ranch house. A parade of luxury vehicles, BMWs, Mercedes, a gleaming Tesla, snaked down his gravel driveway. Men in designer swim trunks and women in bikinis that cost more than his monthly feed budget poured out, chattering excitedly as they hauled coolers and pool floats toward his backyard. Jake's blood pressure spiked. He'd been dealing with Karen Whitmore for 6 months now, ever since she'd moved into the McMansion that some developer had somehow managed to build right on the edge of his property line. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He stormed out his back door, his boots kicking up dust clouds as he marched toward the chaos. The closer he got, the more details assaulted his senses, the chemical smell of chlorine, the thumping bass of expensive speakers, the clink of wine glasses, and Karen's distinctive laugh, sharp and piercing as a hawk's cry. "Excuse me." Jake's voice boomed across the gathering, cutting through the party noise like a blade. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen looked up from her position on a floating unicorn, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the heat, her red bikini barely containing her surgically enhanced figure. Her smile was as fake as her tan. "Oh, Jake. There you are, honey." She waved a manicured hand as if greeting an old friend. "Isn't this just divine?" The city approved the community pool project, and this was the perfect spot for it. "Community pool?" Jake's voice cracked with disbelief. "Lady, this is my land. My property." Karen's laugh tinkled like broken glass. "Oh, sweetie, I'm afraid there's been a little misunderstanding." She gestured to a man in a polo shirt who was manning the tiki bar. "Brad, be a dear and show Jake the paperwork." Brad, who looked like he'd never worked a day in his life, sauntered over with a folder, his boat shoe squeaking on the pool deck. "Here you go, buddy. All legal and above board." The city council voted unanimously to establish this as a community recreational facility. Jake snatched the papers, his eyes scanning the official letterhead and stamps. His heart sank as he read the legalese, but one phrase jumped out at him: eminent domain proceedings. Fair market compensation, a public good. "This is impossible," Jake growled. "I never received any notice. Never got a chance to contest this." "Oh, but you did." Karen's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I personally delivered the notice to your mailbox 3 weeks ago. The hearing was last Tuesday at 2 o'clock. Such a shame you didn't show up to defend your little, what do you call it, dirt patch." Jake's mind raced. 3 weeks ago, he'd been in the hospital with his father, who'd suffered a heart attack. During roundup, he'd barely left the old man's side, and his mailbox, a rusted metal box at the end of his quarter-mile driveway, had been the last thing on his mind. "My father was dying," Jake said quietly, the words coming out like gravel. Karen's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry for your loss, but the law is the law. The city needed this space for the greater good of the community. We are building something beautiful here, something that brings people together." "This isn't community," Jake spat, gesturing at the crowd of entitled strangers who were treating his land like their personal resort. "This is your private club." Now, Karen waved him off. "Don't be so dramatic. Anyone can use the pool. Well, anyone who can afford the modest membership fee and passes the background check." Her smile turned predatory. "I'm sure someone like you could find a way to qualify." Eventually, the crowd had gone quiet, sensing the tension. Jake felt their eyes on him, some amused, others uncomfortable, but all of them seeing him as the outsider on his own land. A woman in a floppy hat whispered something to her husband, who chuckled and shook his head. "You can't do this," Jake said, his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "I'm calling my lawyer." "Oh, honey," Karen's voice turned patronizing. "Did you not read the fine print? All legal challenges must be filed within 72 hours of the notice being delivered. That deadline was about 2 weeks ago." Jake's hands shook as the full scope of Karen's manipulation hit him. She timed this perfectly, waiting until his family crisis, delivering the notice when she knew he wouldn't be there to receive it, rushing through the legal process while he was consumed with grief and hospital visits. "Besides," Karen continued, settling back onto her float, "you should be thanking me. The city is paying you fair market value for this little strip of land. $3,000. That's more than this dusty old field is worth." $3,000. Jake's voice rose. "This is prime grazing land. My family has worked this soil for 3 generations. It's worth 20 times that." "Was worth," Karen corrected, examining her nails. "But let's be honest, Jake. Cattle ranching is a dying industry. Nobody wants to live next to smelly cows and flies. I'm doing you a favor, helping you transition to the modern world." The crowd laughed at her comment, and Jake felt his world tilting. This wasn't just about money or land, it was about everything his family had built, everything they'd sacrificed for, being dismissed as worthless by people who'd never worked a day in their lives. "You want to know what's smelly?" Jake's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "People who steal from their neighbors and call it progress." Karen's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Now, Jake, there's no need for name-calling. Why don't you run along and let us enjoy our day? The pool is beautiful, the weather is perfect, and we have a lot of celebrating to do." Jake looked around at the faces surrounding him, Karen's friends, her wealthy cronies, all of them united in their certainty that they deserved this more than he did. They saw him as a relic, a stubborn old cowboy standing in the way of their vision of paradise. "Fine," Jake said finally. "Enjoy your pool." He turned and walked back toward his house, his boots heavy on the hard-packed earth. Behind him, the party resumed with renewed energy, as if his capitulation had been the final ingredient they needed for their perfect day. But as Jake reached his kitchen door, he paused. From here, he could see the entire scene, the glittering pool, the laughing crowd, and beyond them, the pasture where his cattle should have been grazing. His cattle, who were currently locked in the north pasture, a mile away from their usual water source because Karen had somehow convinced the city that his stock pond was a public health hazard. Jake's eyes narrowed as he studied the scene. The pool was surrounded by a decorative fence, but the gate leading to his property was wide open. Karen and her friends were so focused on their celebration that they hadn't noticed what any rancher would have spotted immediately. The cattle guard at the main gate was down for repairs, and the temporary fence he'd put up this morning was secured with nothing more than a simple latch. A slow smile spread across Jake's weathered face. Karen wanted to play games with the law, twist regulations to steal his land, and humiliate him in front of her friends. She thought she'd won because she had better lawyers and more money. But Karen had made one crucial mistake: she'd forgotten that this was still a working ranch, and Jake Morrison knew exactly where to find 200 head of very thirsty cattle. As the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly and the partygoers splashed in their stolen paradise, Jake quietly walked to his truck. The engine turned over with a familiar rumble, and he drove slowly toward the north pasture, where his herd waited in the shade of the old oak trees. Justice, Jake thought as he parked and began walking toward the cattle, sometimes comes in the most unexpected forms. And today, it was going to come with hooves. The cattle sensed Jake's presence before he even reached the fence line. 200 head of Black Angus and Herefords lifted their massive heads, their dark eyes tracking his movement with the lazy interest of animals who knew their routine. They'd been without water for 6 hours now, ever since Karen's health inspector had declared their stock pond contaminated and ordered it drained. "Hey there, girls," Jake murmured, his voice carrying the gentle tone he'd learned from his father. "How'd you like a nice, cold drink?" The lead cow, a massive Angus named Bessie who'd been with the ranch for 8 years, lowed softly and stepped toward the fence. Behind her, the herd began to stir, their hooves creating small dust clouds in the dry earth. Jake's hands worked quickly on the gate latch, his fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The metal clicked open and he swung the gate wide, stepping aside as Bessie ambled through. The rest of the herd followed, their movement slow and deliberate at first, then picking up pace as they caught the scent of water on the air. "That's it," Jake whispered, walking alongside them as they began their march toward the main ranch. "Just follow your noses." The sound of their hooves on the hard-packed earth was like distant thunder, growing louder with each step. Jake stayed with them, guiding them gently toward the open gate that led to his backyard, the gate that Karen's party planners had propped open for easy access to their stolen paradise. As they crested the small hill that overlooked his property, Jake could see the pool party in full swing. The tiki bar was packed, with Brad mixing colorful drinks for a line of laughing customers. Children splashed in the shallow end while their parents lounged on expensive inflatable flamingos. Karen held court from her unicorn float, regaling a circle of admirers with what looked like an animated story. None of them noticed the approaching herd. Jake pulled out his phone and hit record. If this was going to happen, he wanted evidence of every second. The cattle smelled the water now, their pace quickening from a leisurely walk to a determined trot. Bessie's ears perked forward, and she let out a loud bellow that echoed across the property. The sound made several partygoers look up from their drinks, confusion clouding their faces. "What was that?" someone called out. "Probably just a neighbor's dog," Karen replied dismissively, not bothering to look up from her phone where she was posting selfies. "Don't worry about it." But the sound came again, closer now, followed by the unmistakable rumble of 200 animals moving with purpose. A woman in a designer cover-up stood up from her lounge chair, shading her eyes as she peered toward the hill. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God." Her scream cut through the party noise like a siren. Every head turned toward the hill, where the first wave of cattle had just come into view. Bessie led the charge, her massive frame silhouetted against the sky, followed by a sea of black and brown bodies moving with the inexorable force of a natural disaster. The pool party froze for one perfect moment, like a photograph capturing the exact second when privileged suburbanites realized they were about to face the consequences of their actions. Then chaos erupted. "Stampede," someone screamed, and the carefully orchestrated paradise dissolved into panic. People scattered in every direction, abandoning their drinks and diving for cover behind lounge chairs and pool equipment. Karen's unicorn float spun wildly as she tried to paddle toward the pool's edge, her perfectly styled hair whipping across her face. "This can't be happening," she shrieked. "This is a municipal facility. There are laws." But the cattle weren't interested in municipal codes. They'd found water, and after 6 hours in the blazing sun, nothing was going to stop them from drinking. Bessie reached the pool's edge first, her massive head dipping down to sample the chlorinated water. She snorted in disgust at the chemical taste, but the drought had left her with no choice. The rest of the herd pressed forward, their hooves clattering on the pool deck as they jostled for position. The decorative fence that surrounded the pool area crumpled like paper under their weight, white pickets scattering across the ground. "Get them away from the pool!" Karen screamed from her float, which was now trapped in the middle of the water as cattle surrounded the perimeter. "Someone call animal control." Brad had abandoned his tiki bar and was trying to climb onto the pool house roof, his boat shoes slipping on the shingles. "I'm calling the police," he yelled, his phone held high above his head. Jake emerged from behind the hill, walking calmly through the chaos with his phone still recording. His expression was serene, almost peaceful, as he watched 200 head of cattle turn Karen's exclusive pool party into a livestock convention. "Jake!" Karen spotted him and began paddling frantically in his direction. "Do something. Control your animals." "They are just thirsty," Jake replied mildly, stepping over a crushed lounge chair. "You remember thirst, don't you, Karen? That feeling when you want something that belongs to someone else." A massive bull named Thunder had discovered the tiki bar and was investigating the colorful bottles with obvious interest. His horn caught the edge of the bar's bamboo awning, and the entire structure collapsed in a shower of artificial palm fronds and scattered garnishes. "My margarita machine!" Brad wailed from his perch on the roof. The children who'd been playing in the pool had been quickly evacuated by their parents, most of whom were now huddled in their cars, watching the spectacle through closed windows. But the cattle showed no interest in the humans. They were focused entirely on the water, which was rapidly turning brown as dozens of animals waded in to drink. "This is vandalism!" Karen shrieked, still trapped on her float as a gentle cow named Daisy investigated the plastic unicorn with curious sniffs. "I'm suing you for everything you have." "With what?" Jake asked, his voice carrying across the chaos. "The $3,000 you're paying me for my land. I think my legal fees might be a little higher than that." A woman in a floppy hat was trying to rescue her designer purse from under the hooves of a particularly large steer. "Somebody help me," she cried. "That bag cost more than my car. Maybe you should have thought about that before you decided to party on stolen land," Jake replied, not moving to help. The pool water was now completely undrinkable, a murky brown soup of chlorine and cattle residue. But the herd didn't seem to mind. They'd been without water for hours, and even contaminated water was better than no water at all. Karen finally managed to paddle her float to the pool's edge, where she climbed out with as much dignity as she could muster while dripping wet and surrounded by livestock. Her red bikini was now streaked with pool scum, and her perfect hair hung in soggy strands around her face. "You think you're so clever," she spat, marching toward Jake with her hands clenched into fists. "But this doesn't change anything. The law is still the law. This is still municipal property." "Is it?" Jake pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. "Because I've been doing some research while you've been playing in your pool. Turns out that eminent domain hearing you mentioned, the one I supposedly missed, there's no record of it ever happening." Karen's face went pale beneath her tan. "That's impossible." "I have the paperwork forged," Jake continued calmly. "I called the city clerk's office. They have no record of any community pool project. No permits, no hearings, no votes. Just a very expensive pool installation that someone paid for privately and illegally placed on my land." The crowd of partygoers had gone silent, their attention focused on the confrontation between Jake and Karen. Even the cattle seemed to sense the tension, their drinking becoming more subdued. "You're lying," Karen whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" Jake gestured toward the chaos around them. "You want to call the police? Be my guest. Let's see what they think about this municipal facility when they run the permits through the system." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around them, her friends and fellow partygoers were beginning to back away, sensing that they'd been caught up in something much bigger than a simple property dispute. "The background checks," someone called out. "Karen, you said we all had to pass background checks to use the pool. And the membership fees," another voice added. $500 each. You said it was going to the city." Karen's eyes darted around the crowd, seeing the dawning realization on their faces. "I can explain," she began, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of approaching sirens. Jake smiled as he watched the police cars turn into his driveway. "Looks like someone did call the authorities after all." As the officers approached, taking in the scene of cattle wading in a backyard pool surrounded by scattered party debris, Jake felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. Karen had tried to steal his land through lies and legal manipulation, but she'd forgotten one crucial thing: the truth always finds a way to surface. And sometimes, Jake thought as he watched Karen frantically trying to explain the situation to a very confused police officer, justice comes with hooves, horns, and a herd of very thirsty witnesses. Officer Martinez had been on the force for 15 years, but he'd never responded to a call quite like this one. The dispatcher had mentioned something about a livestock incident at a pool party, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight of 200 cattle casually drinking from a backyard swimming pool while panicked suburbanites cowered in luxury cars. "I need you to slow down," he said to Karen, who was gesticulating wildly with her hands while water dripped from her ruined hair. "Start from the beginning. You're saying this is a municipal facility?" "Yes." A community pool. Approved. By the city council. Karen's voice cracked with desperation. This man, she pointed at Jake, who was leaning against a fence post with the casual confidence of someone who'd done nothing wrong. He deliberately sabotaged a public facility. Officer Martinez looked around at the chaos. The pool water was now the color of chocolate milk, and a particularly large bull was using the diving board as a scratching post. And you have permits for this municipal facility? Of course I have permits. Karen fumbled with her designer pool bag, which was now soaked and covered in mud. Right here they are, they were right here. Jake stepped forward, his phone in hand. Officer, I think you'll find this interesting. I just got off the phone with City Hall. He handed Martinez his phone, which displayed a conversation with the city clerk's office. The officer's eyebrows rose as he read the text messages. So according to this, Martinez said slowly, the city has no record of any community pool project. No permits, no hearings, no appropriation of funds. That's impossible. Karen snatched the phone from his hands, her eyes scanning the messages. There has to be some mistake. I have documentation, forged documentation, Jake interrupted. I also called the contractor who installed the pool. Turns out he was paid in cash by someone who claimed to be representing the city, but he never received any official permits or city purchase orders. Karen's face went from red to white to green in the span of seconds. Around them, her party guests were beginning to piece together the implications of what they were hearing. Wait a minute, called out a man in designer swim trunks. Karen, you collected membership fees from all of us. $500 each. You said it was going to the city for maintenance costs. And the background checks, added a woman who was wringing pool water from her cover-up. You made us all submit personal information. Social security numbers, employment records, financial statements. Officer Martinez's expression grew more serious. How many people paid membership fees? Karen's mouth opened and closed wordlessly. Jake could see the mental calculations happening behind her eyes, trying to figure out how much money she'd collected, how many laws she'd broken, how deep the hole she'd dug really was. I would need to check my records, she finally managed. 47 people, called out Brad, who had finally climbed down from the pool house roof. I kept track because Karen asked me to help with the accounting. $500 each. That's $23,500. The crowd erupted in angry murmurs. Someone shouted, that's fraud. Another voice called out, she stole our money. Now wait just a minute, Karen held up her hands, her voice rising to a shriek. I never stole anything. That money went to legitimate expenses. The pool installation, the permits, the legal fees. What legal fees? Jake's voice cut through her protests. You just admitted there were no real permits. No real hearings. No real legal process. Officer Martinez was taking notes now, his pen moving rapidly across his notepad. I'm going to need you to come with me to the station. We need to discuss this situation in detail. I want my lawyer, Karen said immediately. That's your right, Martinez replied. But first, we need to deal with the immediate situation. This pool is on private property without the owner's permission. That makes it trespassing at minimum, possibly criminal trespass and theft of services. Jake watched as Karen's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. The cattle were still drinking from the pool, their massive bodies creating waves that splashed over the edges and onto the expensive deck furniture. Thunder the Bull had discovered the sound system and was rubbing against the speakers, creating a horrible feedback screech that sent the remaining partygoers fleeing toward their cars. Officer, Jake said quietly, I want to press charges. Criminal trespass, fraud, theft, and destruction of property. She's been planning this for months. Timing it to coincide with my father's death so I couldn't fight it. Karen whirled around, her eyes blazing with fury. Your father was a stubborn old fool who refused to sell his land to people who could actually use it. This ranch is dying, Jake. Look around you. Cattle and dust and nothing else. I was trying to build something beautiful, something that would benefit the whole community. By stealing, Jake said simply. By forging documents and lying to your friends and taking their money under false pretenses. I never meant for it to go this far. Karen's composure finally cracked completely. The city was supposed to approve the project. I had inside information that they were looking for community development opportunities. I thought if I got the ball rolling, showed them how popular it would be, they'd rubber stamp the permits retroactively. Officer Martinez stopped writing and looked up. You saying you built this without permits, hoping the city would approve it after the fact? It was supposed to be a fait accompli. Karen's voice was almost a wail now. A done deal. Everyone would see how wonderful it was, how much the community needed it, and the city would have to approve it. Even if that had worked, Jake said. Which it wouldn't have, you still stole my land. You still lied to these people and took their money. The crowd of partygoers was now actively hostile, their earlier amusement replaced by anger as they realized they'd been conned. Someone was filming the confrontation with their phone, and Jake could see others making calls, probably to their own lawyers. I can pay everyone back, Karen said desperately. The money is all there. I never spent it on anything personal. It's all in a separate account for the pool project. $23,500, Brad said grimly. Plus the cost of the pool installation, which was another $40,000. Where did that money come from, Karen? Karen's silence was answer enough. Jake could see the gears turning in everyone's minds if she'd collected $23,500 from membership fees but spent $40,000 on the pool. Where had the extra money come from? The mortgage, whispered a woman in a floppy hat. Karen, you said you got a second mortgage on your house to pay for landscaping. Was that money actually for this? And the jewelry, added another voice. You sold your grandmother's jewelry collection last month. You said it was because you were downsizing. Jake felt almost sorry for Karen as he watched her friends and neighbors piece together the scope of her deception. She'd financed her illegal pool project by liquidating her assets and taking on debt, all based on the fantasy that the city would eventually legitimize her theft. Officer Martinez closed his notepad. I'm placing you under arrest for fraud, criminal trespass, and theft. You have the right to remain silent. As he read Karen her rights, Jake noticed that the cattle were beginning to lose interest in the pool. The water was now undrinkable even by livestock standards, and they were starting to wander toward the genuine grass on the far side of his property. Jake, Karen called out as Martinez guided her toward the police car. Jake, please. We can work this out. I'll tear down the pool, restore your land, pay for any damages. Just don't let them take me to jail. Jake looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. Without her perfect makeup and designer clothes, dripping wet and desperate, she looked like what she'd always been, a small, frightened person who tried to make herself feel important by taking what didn't belong to her. You know what, Karen? Jake said quietly. 3 months ago, if you'd come to me and asked nicely, I might have sold you a piece of land for a pool. Fair price, legal contracts, everyone happy. But you didn't want to ask. You wanted to take. You wanted to humiliate me in front of your friends and make me feel like I didn't matter. I'm sorry, Karen whispered, tears mixing with the chlorinated water on her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Maybe not, Jake replied. But it did. And now you get to live with the consequences. As the police car drove away with Karen in the back seat, Jake surveyed the wreckage of her stolen paradise. The pool would have to be drained and removed, the deck torn up, his land restored. It would cost money and time, but it would be worth it to have his property back. The cattle were already heading home, their thirst finally satisfied. Bessie paused at the gate and looked back at Jake, as if to say, "Good work, boss." Jake smiled and tipped his hat to her. Sometimes justice came through the courts, sometimes through the law, and sometimes through 200 head of very thirsty cattle who knew the difference between what was theirs and what belonged to someone else. But as he watched the last of Karen's friends drive away, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. People like Karen didn't give up easily. And even from jail, she'd be looking for a way to get revenge. The question was, what would she do next? Jake's instincts proved correct. Karen Whitmore was released on bail 3 days later, her McMansion mortgage to the hilt to pay for the best defense attorney money could buy. But it wasn't her legal strategy that worried Jake, it was the convoy of official-looking vehicles that began appearing on the road outside his ranch at dawn on Thursday morning. The first sign of trouble came when Jake stepped out to check on the cattle and found a woman in a business suit standing in his driveway, clipboard in hand and a badge hanging from her neck. "Mr. Morrison. I'm Inspector Patricia Vance from the County Health Department. I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your livestock operation." Jake's coffee mug froze halfway to his lips. "Routine inspection? I've been ranching here for 30 years. Never had a routine inspection." "Well, we've received several complaints about potential health violations on your property. Contaminated water sources, improper waste disposal. Concerns about disease transmission." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm sure it's nothing serious, but we have to follow up on every complaint." Jake's blood ran cold. "Who filed the complaints?" "I'm not at liberty to say, but they were quite detailed. Multiple reports from concerned citizens about livestock having access to contaminated water, specifically mentioning an incident where cattle were observed drinking from a chlorinated pool." Jake's jaw clenched. Karen wasn't just fighting back, she was playing dirty, using the very incident that had exposed her fraud as ammunition against him. "That pool was illegally installed on my property without my knowledge or consent," Jake said carefully. "The cattle accessed it because they were being denied their usual water source." "Yes, well, that's what I'm here to investigate." "Inspector." Vance began walking toward the pasture, her heels clicking on the gravel. "I'll need to examine your water sources, feed storage, waste management systems, and review your vaccination records." As she spoke, Jake noticed 2 more vehicles pulling up, a truck from the Department of Agriculture and a van from Environmental Services. His heart sank as he realized the scope of Karen's counterattack. "Mr. Morrison." A heavy-set man in a cowboy had approached, his badge identifying him as Tom Bradley from the Department of Agriculture. "I'm here about reports of potentially dangerous animals on your property. We've received complaints about aggressive livestock threatening public safety." "Aggressive livestock?" Jake's voice rose in disbelief. "They are cattle, not wild animals. The report mentions a bull using a diving board as a scratching post and multiple animals destroying private property." Bradley consulted his notepad. "Also mentions that you deliberately released these animals to attack innocent civilians at a community gathering." Jake felt the walls closing in. Karen had taken the cattle's perfectly natural behavior, seeking water when they were thirsty, and twisted it into a narrative of deliberate malice and public endangerment. "I need to call my lawyer," Jake said, pulling out his phone. "That's your right," Inspector Vance replied. "But these inspections are going to happen regardless. We have legal authority to examine this property for public health and safety violations." The next 4 hours were a nightmare of bureaucratic harassment. Every aspect of Jake's operation was scrutinized, photographed, and documented. The inspectors found minor violations that had been overlooked for decades: a loose board on a fence, a water trough that needed cleaning, paperwork that was technically late. But it was the Environmental Services inspector who delivered the killing blow. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice grave as she emerged from examining the area where the pool had been. "I'm afraid we've found evidence of serious groundwater contamination. Chlorine levels in the soil are dangerously high, and there are traces of various chemicals that could pose a threat to the local water table." Jake stared at her in shock. "That's from the illegal pool that was installed without my permission. Regardless of how it got there, you're the property owner, which makes you responsible for remediation. I'm issuing a cease and desist order for all livestock operations until the contamination can be properly addressed." "You can't do that," Jake protested. "This is my livelihood. My cattle need to graze, they need water. I'm sorry, but public safety has to come first. You'll need to remove all livestock from the property within 48 hours and keep them off until we can verify that the contamination has been contained." Jake felt his world crumbling. Karen had set a trap that was diabolical in its simplicity. Use the illegal pool's environmental damage as grounds to shut down his ranch, forcing him to sell the land or face bankruptcy. As the inspectors packed up their equipment, Jake's lawyer arrived, a harried-looking man named Peter Walsh who'd been handling the Morrison family's legal affairs for 20 years. "Jake, I came as soon as I got your message." "What the hell is going on here?" Jake filled him in on the inspections and the cease and desist order. Walsh's expression grew darker with each detail. "This is a coordinated attack," Walsh said grimly. "Someone with connections filed these complaints simultaneously across multiple agencies. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental." "Karen Whitmore," Jake said. "It has to be her." "Maybe, but proving it will be difficult. These complaints appear to be filed by different people, and they are all technically legitimate concerns that the agencies have to investigate." Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, "Enjoying your inspections. This is just the beginning. Drop the charges and we can work something out." A friend, Jake showed the message to Walsh, who whistled low. "That's witness intimidation. We can use this." But before Jake could respond, another vehicle pulled into his driveway. This one was a news van from the local television station. And Jake's heart sank as he recognized the perfectly coiffed reporter climbing out. "Mr. Morrison," the reporter called out, her camera operator already filming. "I'm Diana Chen from Channel 7 News. We are here about reports of a dangerous livestock operation that's been contaminating local groundwater. Do you have any comment?" Jake looked at the camera, then at the reporter, then at the chaos of his ranch, government vehicles, official notices, and now media attention. Karen had orchestrated this perfectly, turning him from victim to villain in the public eye. "No comment," Jake said, heading for his house. But Diana Chen wasn't finished. "Mr. Morrison, sources tell us that you deliberately released cattle to attack innocent people at a community pool. Are you concerned about potential lawsuits from the victims?" Jake stopped dead in his tracks. "Victims? Lady, there were no victims. Those people were trespassing on my land. So you admit to releasing dangerous animals to drive away people who were simply trying to enjoy a public recreational facility." Jake realized he was being baited, but the anger was too strong to contain. "Public facility? That was a fraud. Karen Whitmore illegally installed that pool on my property and scammed people out of thousands of dollars. Are you saying that Ms. Whitmore, who is currently facing charges related to this incident, was justified in creating this community resource? That perhaps your resistance to progress is what led to this tragic misunderstanding?" The camera was rolling, and Jake could see exactly how this would play on the evening news, him looking angry and defensive, talking about cattle and fraud, while a sympathetic reporter painted him as a backward rancher who'd attacked innocent families. "Get off my property," Jake said quietly. "Mr. Morrison, the public has a right to know," I said. "Get off my property." Jake's voice boomed across the ranch, and he took a step toward the camera crew. The reporter's eyes lit up with triumph. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Morrison? Is this the same violent behavior you displayed toward the families at the pool?" Jake's lawyer grabbed his arm. "Jake, don't say another word. Not another word." But the damage was done. Jake could see it in the reporter's satisfied expression, in the way the camera operator kept filming even as they retreated to their van. By evening, the story would be twisted into something unrecognizable, a dangerous rancher who'd used his cattle as weapons against innocent families and was now covering up environmental crimes. As the news van drove away, Jake stood in his driveway surrounded by the wreckage of his life. The cattle that had been his salvation 3 days ago were now penned up in a temporary facility, his ranch was under government scrutiny, and Karen had successfully turned the tables on him. "She's good," Walsh said grimly. "Evil, but good. She's using the system against you the same way you used the cattle against her." Jake's phone buzzed again. Another text from the same unknown number, "Still feeling proud of your little stunt. By tomorrow, everyone will know you're the real villain here. Last chance to make this go away quietly." Jake stared at the message, his mind racing. Karen had outmaneuvered him completely, turning his moment of triumph into a public relations disaster. But as he looked around his ranch, the land his grandfather had cleared, his father had improved, and he'd spent his life protecting, Jake Felt a familiar fire building in his chest. Karen thought she'd won because she'd managed to twist the narrative, because she had connections and money and a talent for manipulation. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that because she'd knocked Jake down, he'd stay down. Jake Morrison had been fighting for this land his entire life. And he wasn't. Jake spent the entire night in his study, surrounded by old documents, newspaper clippings, and his laptop. By dawn, he'd assembled a story that would make Karen Whitmore wish she'd never heard the name Morrison Ranch. The key had been digging into Karen's past, something that apparently no one, including her own friends, had ever bothered to do. What Jake discovered was a pattern of behavior stretching back 15 years and 3 different states: fraudulent investment schemes, forged permits for illegal home additions, and a trail of angry former neighbors who'd been scammed, harassed, or both. But the crown jewel was a court document from Phoenix, Arizona, dated just 2 years ago. Karen had been sued by an elderly widow named Rose Martinez for elder abuse and financial exploitation. The case had been settled out of court for $150,000. With a sealed record and a non-disclosure agreement that Jake's lawyer friend in Phoenix had accidentally stumbled across in the public filing system. Jake smiled grimly as he printed out the document. Karen had made her fortune preying on vulnerable people, and now she'd finally picked the wrong target. His phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Peter Walsh, sounding exhausted but excited. "Jake, I've been up all night working on this. I found something big." That environmental inspector, Patricia Vance. She's Karen's cousin. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I ran background checks on everyone who showed up yesterday. Vance and Whitmore share the same grandmother. The health department inspector has no family connections, but guess who recommended her for the job 6 months ago? A city councilman named Robert Whitmore, Karen's ex-husband." The pieces clicked into place. Karen hadn't just filed complaints, she'd activated a network of connections and relatives to orchestrate the entire takedown. It was corruption on a scale that Jake could barely comprehend. "There's more," Walsh continued. "I've been tracking the money from her pool scheme. She didn't just scam her friends, she's been running similar cons in 3 other counties. The total fraud could be close to $500,000. Jake felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "Peter, how do you feel about holding a press conference?" "What kind of press conference?" "The kind that burns Karen's house down around her ears." Jake spent the morning making calls. First to Rose Martinez in Phoenix, who was more than happy to break her NDA when she learned about Karen's latest victims. Then to investigative reporters in 3 different states who'd been tracking Karen's various schemes. Finally, to Brad, the hapless tiki bar manager who'd helped Karen with her accounting and was now facing potential charges as an accessory to fraud. Brad was terrified and more than willing to cooperate when Jake explained that his choice was between helping expose Karen's larger operation or going down with her when the FBI inevitably got involved. "She told me it was all legal," Brad said over the phone, his voice shaking. "She showed me documents, permits, everything looked official." "I never would have helped her if I'd known." "Brad," Jake interrupted. "Do you still have records of all the money she collected? Names, amounts, dates? Everything." "She made me keep detailed spreadsheets. Said it was for tax purposes." "Perfect. I need you to bring those records to the courthouse steps at noon today. There's going to be a press conference and you're going to be the star witness." By 11:30 a.m., Jake had assembled an army. Rose Martinez had flown in from Phoenix with her own lawyer and a folder full of evidence about Karen's previous scams. 3 investigative reporters had driven in from surrounding cities, their cameras and notebooks ready. Brad stood nervously beside a table loaded with financial records and forged documents. And at the center of it all, Jake waited with the calm confidence of a man who'd finally found the right weapon for the fight. Karen arrived at 11:45, flanked by her expensive lawyer and what looked like a small security detail. She'd clearly expected another ambush interview, not a full-scale media event. Her face went pale when she saw the assembled crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jake began, his voice carrying across the courthouse steps. 3 days ago, I was portrayed as a dangerous rancher who used cattle to attack innocent people. Today, I'm here to tell you the real story about Karen Whitmore and her pattern of fraud, manipulation, and elder abuse. Karen's lawyer stepped forward. My client has no comment on these baseless accusations. Is it baseless that your client defrauded Rose Martinez, an 82-year-old widow, out of her life savings? Jake gestured to the elderly woman beside him. Mrs. Martinez, would you like to tell everyone how Ms. Whitmore convinced you to invest in a fake municipal bond scheme? Rose Martinez's voice was steady despite her age. She told me the city was issuing special bonds for senior citizens. Guaranteed returns, completely safe. She took $150,000 from my retirement account and disappeared. When I finally tracked her down, she threatened to sue me for harassment if I didn't sign a non-disclosure agreement. The reporters were frantically taking notes, their cameras focused on Rose's face as she continued her story. Karen tried to retreat, but the crowd blocked her path. Brad, Jake called out. Why don't you tell everyone about the detailed records you kept for Ms. Whitmore's pool scheme? Brad stepped forward nervously, his hands shaking as he held up a thick folder. She collected money from 47 people. $23,500 in membership fees for a pool that was never legally approved. She also collected personal information, social security numbers, bank account details, employment records. She said it was for background checks, but she was actually building profiles for identity theft, interrupted one of the reporters, a woman from the state capitol who'd been tracking Karen for months. We've identified at least 12 victims whose personal information was compromised after paying Karen's various fees and dues. Karen's composure finally cracked. This is a setup, she screamed. This man is a criminal. He deliberately endangered innocent people with dangerous animals. He's trying to distract from his own crimes. Jake smiled and pulled out his phone. Speaking of crimes, everyone should hear this interesting voice message I received last night. He pressed play, and Karen's voice filled the air. Jake, this is Karen. I know you think you've won, but you have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in every government office in this county. I can make your life hell in ways you can't even imagine. Drop the charges, sign over the mineral rights to your land, and maybe I'll call off the dogs. Otherwise, by the time I'm done with you, you'll be begging to sell me that worthless ranch for pennies on the dollar. The crowd erupted. Karen's own words had condemned her, admitting to having corrupt connections, threatening extortion, and revealing that her real goal had been the mineral rights to Jake's land all along. That's taken completely out of context. Karen's lawyer protested, but his heart wasn't in it. Jake could see the man mentally calculating how quickly he could withdraw from the case. Is it? Jake asked. Because I also have recordings of phone calls between Ms. Whitmore and her cousin Patricia Vance, discussing how to time the environmental inspection for maximum impact. And text messages between her and City Councilman Robert Whitmore about expediting the health department complaints. Karen's face went from pale to grey. She'd been caught in a web of her own making, and every thread led back to her. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Diana Chen, the TV reporter who'd ambushed Jake the day before, stepped forward with her camera operator. Mr. Morrison, she said, her tone completely different from their previous encounter. I owe you an apology. After our interview yesterday, I started investigating Ms. Whitmore's background. What I found was a pattern of manipulation and fraud spanning multiple states. I'd like to give you a chance to tell your side of the story. Jake looked directly into the camera. Karen Whitmore illegally installed a pool on my property using forged permits and fake city approval. She scammed nearly 50 people out of money for a fraudulent community facility. When my cattle, who had been denied access to their usual water source because of her lies, naturally sought out the nearest available water, she twisted that into a narrative about dangerous animals attacking innocent people. The real danger here isn't my cattle, it's letting people like Karen Whitmore prey on honest, hard-working families. As Jake spoke, he could see Karen deflating like a punctured balloon. Her network of corruption was exposed, her pattern of fraud revealed, and her latest scheme had spectacularly backfired. The final humiliation came when FBI agents, who had been quietly investigating Karen's multi-state fraud operation, chose that moment to arrest her on federal charges. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at Jake with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll find a way to him," one of the FBI agents said firmly. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As the crowd dispersed and the reporters filed their stories, Jake stood alone on the courthouse steps, watching Karen's legal team scatter like leaves in the wind. Peter Walsh approached, grinning broadly. "Jake, I think it's safe to say that your ranch is secure. The environmental cease and desist order has been withdrawn. Turns out it was based on fraudulent information. The health department inspector has been suspended pending investigation. And as for the pool,